During my last cross-country flight from St. George, Utah to Page, Arizona, I decided that since I had my GoPro, I should break it out and take some good video. So maybe later in the future, if I had some time, I can record over it and show kind of a textbook example of a cross-country flight. So here we are in Page, Arizona. It's right off of Lake Powell, and I've already made it to this point, which is the destination point for my cross-country flight, and I'm about to fly back home. I'm flying a Cessna 172 Skyhawk, as you can see. Cessna's tried and true. I definitely love these airplanes. I grew up with many of them in our family, and I was able to learn the differences between each of them and see the reliability throughout the years. So the first thing I do during a pre-flight, which I'm going to show in this video, is go through the checklist. Like I said, I've pre-flighted many airplanes throughout my life, but even so, I like to check the checklist to make sure that I'm not missing anything, because that happens a lot in aviation and you can never check and recheck too many times. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and walk around and check the prop. That's your power source. You don't want any nicks or dings from rocks or any type of debris. Check the leading edge and the strut here, and just checking for damage or anything that can be hazardous to flight. I'm going to walk back here to the elevator. That's always next step on my list, and I like to tug on it a little bit, make sure that it's solid, especially the rudder tab here, and check for the bolts that hold everything together. Make sure that nothing looks out of place there. Going back to the airplane, I'm going to grab or put the checklist back. Check the other side of the airplane. You can see it's a beautiful day here in Page. Everything looks good on here, the wing's good, and I just flew this airplane not too long ago, so nothing would happen while it's sitting. I'm going to check the oil right now. Little trick I have for this is to, instead of using a rag and wiping it down completely, I just make a mark with my finger where there's oil, so it's a clean spot on the dipstick. Make sure to tighten it down all the way, and then remove it, and I can see that the spot that was cleared from my finger is indeed covered in oil. We're looking at just over 7 quarts, which is perfect for this engine, so we are good to go on that. We're going to walk around back to the airplane now. Kind of in my series of events is grabbing what I call the fuel cup and the fuel stick. I'm sure they have actual names, but that's what I always called it growing up. Fuel stick for measuring the fuel in the tanks, and the cup for checking the quality of the fuel. So we'll do that right now. I'm going to release some of the fuel right through that fuel port, and the fuel should have a blue tint as it's avgas. I like to hold it up against something white like the airplane. Check and make sure everything's good. Everything does check out for that, so we'll check the other tank. You're basically looking for water or any type of debris that may have gotten into the fuel that, of course, could cause problems later on throughout the flight. I used to pour it out on the ramp, I'll admit, but with new regulations, we have to pour it back in the tank. I don't know how good those regulations are, because I just spilled it all over the wing, which happens a lot, especially when the tanks are so full. So we get some bad fuel mileage for this trip. This fuel stick has increments that tells you an approximate value of how many gallons are in the tank if you insert the sticks directly straight down. You can see this tank's full. I just had the folks here at Page top off this airplane for my flight home. We'll check the other side, and you'll be able to see that they are both full. Like I said, even though they look full and you can see the fuel, always check. It just never hurts to check and recheck. So that all looks good. We're going to tighten this up. Jump down off the airplane. Remove the chocks from the wheels. We're ready to go. I've already had the chains off. It's a perfect calm day, so I don't worry about gusts or wind. And we'll jump into the airplane here. Now, for the remainder of this video, I don't think there's many key points. Part 2 will have the startup and everything associated with that. But I think somewhere on this was a couple months back that I took this flight. I think I showed the flight plan. So I'll plug in my headset here. I think I checked the avionics, but yeah, so I have the airport names, the frequencies, the emergency diversion courses, airports nearby. I have down below my waypoints here that show altitude, which course I'm supposed to be on, tuning the VOR to navigate. Part parking brake off, I'm holding the brakes with my feet, and I like to check the controls, make sure that the ailerons are free and both proportionate to what they should be. Check that elevator, never hurts to do that. So everything looks good. Well, I'll go ahead and hold off till part 2. Alright, now for part 2 is startup of the airplane. So I'm just going to kind of go through and remember as I see what I'm doing here. Key to the airplane, most important thing, obviously. We're going to go down the checklist and see the engine start place, seatbelt check. We're going to check our fuel selector, make sure it's on both. Right here I'm checking the circuit breakers to make sure that there aren't any fuses that have blown. This autopilot fuse was giving me some problems, so I go ahead and leave that out on this flight. Who needs autopilot anyways when you can fly an airplane? Master switch is on. Seat is locked. Headset, everything's good to go. I'm going to turn on, I've turned on the master switch, and that's kind of the circuit that opens up and makes electrical circuit from the battery of the plane all the way around. So one thing I should have done was yelled clear prop, but I'm cranking it over with a 1/4 inch of throttle, and I'm playing with the mixture right now. The sweet spot for this 172 seems to be, I don't know, it seems to be in the throttle. Every airplane is different, but you'll see here I play with the mixture quite a bit. As you're playing with the mixture, you're changing the air-to-fuel ratio, obviously. So I get to a point here where that's not really cutting it, so I decided to give it a little bit more throttle, which helps. I mean, the plane had been sitting for about an hour, so it's not too bad of a thing to give it some throttle, and there we go. She's alive. So engine's running. I'm going to go ahead and shut this window. It's nice on a hot day to turn on the big fan and cool off the plane, but I keep the RPMs up quite a bit. One thing you have to make sure to do is pull that throttle back as soon as you start the engine so you don't hurt anything or damage the engine components. Avionics master is on now, and I know in this video you probably won't be able to see a thing that I'm doing, but I want to check and double check that the VOR readings, the VOR frequencies, are dialed into the navigation input for the aircraft, and that's just from PGA was the VOR 1 to UTI, which is the destination, St. George, Utah airport, and that's its VOR's number. So everything's all set to go. I make a radio check here at some point, I think right here, and I hear back from them say the radio is good. I hear them say that, so we're good to go. They can hear me on the radio. We have two-way communication, and I'm ready to start taxiing now. So before I start to taxi, I'll just mention that I'll go through the radio calls that I make too, if I can see them on this video. Just rechecking everything here on the avionics. The radio calls, the first call that you have to make is to tell other pilots that you're going to taxi from your origin point, which is right here, to the run-up area for the runway, because that's where we want to go. We want to go to take off, and in order to take off, we have to be able to run up and check the engine and check some components of the airplane, make sure it's ready to go. So my radio call was announcing that the Cessna 172, is taxiing up to the run-up area. So as we're taxiing here, the rest of the video is just a taxi video. Part 3 will have the run-up. I just wanted to mention that one of the most important things with taxiing is never taxi too fast, especially with an aircraft like this. You should never taxi faster than you can run. So I know that varies per person, but just a good rule of thumb. So nice slow taxis, always check where you're going and watch out for other traffic, and be listening to the radio to hear if there's any traffic that might be approaching to you, so that you can keep a watch out for it and keep the taxiways safe, because a lot of aircraft incursions do happen on the taxiway, sadly. So on to the run-up. As I'm preparing to run up, I do want to mention that it's always important to be mindful of your prop wash and where the airflow from your propeller is ending up, because you can damage things and blow dirt, blow a lot of air where it doesn't belong, so always be mindful of that. I'm going to grab the checklist and get a little jump on talking about the magneto check here as I do it. Magnetos, each cylinder in the airplane has 2 spark plugs. Magnetos control 1 and 2 per cylinder, left and right magneto. So we're running the engine up to 1800 RPM after locking the brakes, of course. And I'm going to switch off one of those spark plugs in a sense. So I switch to a magneto. There you see engine drop. You can see the RPM drop and hear it and feel it and everything. That's a good sign. Switch it back. Switch it one over to the other magneto and back to both. That shows that if nothing happened when you did that test, that means that the aircraft was running on 1 spark plug per cylinder, which would be a very bad thing. So magnetos are important. There's other times to talk about it rather than the video. I'm checking the gauges to make sure everything's in the green. It looks like we're good. We have vacuum, oil pressure, oil temp, things like that, and fuel flow. You want to make sure those are in the green and good to go. Those are key components for flying the aircraft. So here I have all my waypoints, everything. I have it on hand, and I do want to tune my VOR up here immediately before I take off to the proper heading. Now that's what navigates. If you don't know what a VOR is, definitely check that out. I can't show it on the video, but both of these are tuned correctly. I do not want to ever take off without tuning those, because that would be awful to be right in the middle of a climb out and try to figure out which way you're going. That's hazardous and wasteful of your time and fuel. So everything checks out in the plane, and simulation wise it's ready to go. Theoretically the plane should fly just fine. We've tested all the systems. So now we're taxiing up to the hold short line for the runway. Always check for traffic no matter what. Even if you've been listening to the radio and you haven't heard anyone talking, or you think that it's clear, you have to always check. One thing I like to do is add some power to get the front wheel turning, and check to the left, add a little extra power. When you turn the wheel, it's almost like a brake. Check to the right, everything looks good. Now one other thing, well, of course, set the transponder. That's what I'm doing right now. Set it to squawk 1200. I ask on the radio if there's any traffic on final, because I've been suspicious with many tour aircraft that have been flying in and not calling regular, making regular radio calls. So I asked, and sure enough, there was someone on final that was quite a bit out. Asked them for how far they were and decided to let them go ahead of me. They were pretty confident that if I were to take off and be real quick and sidestep the runway, I'd be fine, but I didn't want to do that, especially with head-on traffic. So that'll be in the next video, the takeoff, and I'll actually merge the 2 videos so there won't be any delay. In the next portion, we've checked for traffic, we're ready to go, we've made our call that we're taking off, or at least I'm going to make that right now. Yes, I'm making that at the moment. Mentioning that we're going to take off. We once again listen to the radio, make sure no one has any objections to that. That would be final traffic. Checking again and again, like I say, check and recheck. Make sure that there's no traffic coming towards you. You can never check too many times. Line up with the runway here, check the GoPro is working. Yes, we're good to go. One thing you can do is once you get out on the runway, align your compass with the runway. That's a smart thing to do, but everything was good in this case. So off we go, power up, watching the airspeed. One thing that I instinctively almost always do is keep my hand on that throttle in case there's any type of emergency. I can abort the flight immediately. Must have been a very relaxed day. Well, 80 knots, we pull off the ground. I like to pull off just a tiny bit before 80 knots. And in this video particularly, I didn't exercise the best rate of climb in the 172 because I want to stay a little bit low. This video specifically was more of an enjoyable video, as Lake Powell is right off the end of the runway here. So I am getting airspeed on the climb out, but staying low so that I can see some cool footage of Lake Powell. So I tilt the wings back and forth here a little bit and check out the lake. It's hard for me to decide what I like better, the lake from a boat's view or an aircraft's view. That's definitely a toss-up, but I think I have to go with the airplane more because aviation is just something I love. So the rest of this video is just a climb out. This is just going to be a couple minutes, not even another minute, of climbing, checking that the rate of climb and making sure that everything's good. I'm at about 80 knots. 78, I believe, is the best rate of climb for the 172. So keeping it somewhere in there is good. Never go below that, otherwise you're wasting your time, your fuel, and risking your safety. You see the lake just looks beautiful. It kind of distracts me every time I fly on a flight like this. The avionics, I have tuned in Page Airport to that so that I can tell exactly how far away I am from the airport. That helps me to make radio calls for all the other aircraft, to tell them where I am, because as this is a CTAF airport, it's just everybody tells everybody where they're at. Just keep everyone updated and let them know where you are. We're climbing pretty good here. I think at this point we're about 3 to 5 miles out from the airport, so I made a radio call at some point in the video. I can't remember where it is to mention that. I was climbing out, leaving, and ultimately you do want to tell when you're leaving the area, when it's your last radio call. So climb out looks good, everything looks good. You can't see it in the video, but gauges are all in the green. Oil pressure is good, fuel flow is good, RPMs are good, the aircraft is pulling, so we're good to go. At this point during the video, I've already climbed out of the area of Page Airport, and I'm flying between Page and St. George. And it looks like my altitude is 8,000 feet, and climbing through 8,000 feet. Looking at my flight plan, everything looks good. The VOR dial is showing that I have a slightly left course deviation. That's what I'm seeing in the video, and as we speak I'm correcting that, flying to intercept the wave so that we can navigate away from Page's VOR is what's happening right now. Around this time, after we've left the area and we're I'd say about 15 miles out, sometimes even 10 is a good time to start this. I usually call in for flight following reports, which is a service that's offered to all aircraft flying. They basically give you a code that you enter in your transponder, and your transponder sends them a message back and forth from the plane to tell them your altitude, your heading, your speed, everything like that. That's that way they can watch you and watch all the other aircraft in the area and tell you if there's anyone who's coming up close to you where you need to watch out for them. They can tell you where they are in relation to you, things like that. Very good safe feature, and they can even give you vectors if you need. So flight following is a great service, and I actually called them up in this video to set that up. It goes something like, if we were in the region of St. George, I would say Los Angeles Center, Cessna 172 Kilo Sierra, request flight following, and then they ask you some questions, you give them some information, and pretty soon you have it set up where they're monitoring your flight for you to tell you about, like I said, traffic or weather updates. They tell you to set your altimeter so that you can make sure that your altimeter is reading correctly, which is very important. In between the last video segment and this one was another GoPro video that I didn't put in the video because this has already gone pretty long. It was just basically canceling my flight following services and setting out my altimeter to the airport which I'm flying into. Looking right now at the checklist is always an important thing to do while you're descending, because there's actually a lot more to it than just pulling the power off. I reach in the mixture completely, pull a little bit of power off, check my altimeter, and make sure that that setting is proper. Like I said, flight following gives it to you, so you'll be able to tell. It gives you an accurate reading, so once you get down to ground level, you'll know you're having a proper reading of pattern altitude. We're watching our airspeed, and everything looks to be good. Everything's in the green. If you look to the left, there's I-15. If you look off to the right, there is St. George City. So we're going to pull the power back just a tiny bit more and keep the RPMs up. And the key factor for this is to fly the airplane in on a glide slope. Instinctively, as a pilot, I like to fly a little bit higher, pull the power off, and glide down to the runway. But the best, most efficient way to do it is to establish a glide path. So flying on in here. Constantly checking your gauges and making sure everything looks good, and making sure that your power settings are proper. Listening to AWAS is a big thing too. Most radios and aircrafts have 1 and 2 COM 2, and this is set to AWAS, and I found that there was a crosswind coming from the west, which is from our right. So naturally the best thing to do when you're landing, if you want a smooth landing, just stick to the right side of the runway. Just barely added a little bit of flaps. I think that was 10 degrees, maybe 20 degrees is what I just added. Airspeed is in the white arc, so we're good. Cruising on down, pulling power off, slowing the plane up a little bit more as we go. See that signaling that the wind is coming from the right. So just fly just to the right of the center line, the numbers, and once I cross those numbers, under all circumstances, I pull the power off completely. The way I like to land is hearing that stall horn, getting as much energy as I can out of the flight before I touch the wheels to the ground. And there we are. Wheels are on the ground, so flaps go up. Usually you use the elevator to air brake and slow the plane down and turn off. I would get off at Alpha 1 to exit the runway and be done, but in this case I'm not done flying. I'm ready to go out for some more fun, so flaps are up and power goes on. And something you'll see funny in this video, I pull up real fast and level out, and that's because St. George Airport has bumps that have formed on the runway, and I don't like riding over them with the wheels. So up we go, up and away, and I hope this video can help someone out. Maybe someone who's getting ready to get their license and is going to fly across country. And that's the whole purpose of it, and I definitely enjoyed filming all this. So until next time.